Afternoon, Cliff.
We all on board.
Hi guys.
Hello.
Right.
Yes, good, thanks.
Good, good.
And according to the time, it is 12 o'clock. Welcome to this, the SAFMA webinar in a series of webinars that we've been running for the last couple of months. And our view was that many of our members, many of our participants, regular participants to these webinars have been exhausted by the COVID-19 topic and the working from home topic. So we thought we'd turn this around and get into a little bit of strategic facilities management. And a good way to start is with the facilities management standards that we have before us these days. Now, what is a standard? A standard is a document that provides requirements, specification, guidelines, or characteristics that can be used consistently to ensure that materials, products, processes, and services are fit for purpose. And why should facility managers, and I use the terminology facility managers because in terms of ISO, the definition is a facility manager. Why should facility managers use standards? Well, a number of reasons. You know, there's growth and increased complexity in the facilities management scope these days. There's a much greater visibility of facilities management business demands out in the world. More regulatory sustainability requirements, greater regulatory compliance needs, globalization challenges, the wealth of facilities management data, and a multitude of other reasons why facility managers should be using standards. We have today with us a very esteemed panel to talk to us about facility management standards in South Africa. And basically how the whole scenario fits together is that any country can join the International Standards Organization, and a technical committee is then created per subject, per field. And the facility management scenario is encapsulated in Technical Committee 267, where each country creates its own technical committee. And subject matter experts are nominated to sit on these technical committees within the countries. And the international group of subject matter experts then write and develop the standards, which take a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of time. And of course, these standards, as they are developed, are subject to rigorous review, peer review, industry review, and the like. And as I said earlier, we are extremely grateful to have in our midst today 3 subject matter experts who have served on these technical committees over the years. And we have the past, the present, and the future in terms of chairmanship of our local technical committee. Our current chairman is Johan Aislinn, the founder of the Academy for Facility Management. We have a past chairman of this committee in Craig Henry, who's the director of CER Ecosystems, and we have the future chairman of our technical committee in the shape of Stephen Malloy, who is a SAFMA director, and yeah, he will be taking over the chairmanship of that committee going forward. So what we're going to do, we're going to ask Stephen to be up first to talk about the ISO 41001 facility management standard, to give us an overview. Craig is then going to give us an overview of the SANS 1752 standard. Johan will draw comparisons or talk to us about differences, if there are any. And we'll then take in comments and questions after each speaker. I think that when we've heard from Stephen, we'll take questions and comments via the chat facility on ISO 41001. After Craig, we'll do the same for the SANS 1752. After Johan, any questions or comments that we might want to put to him, and then we'll conclude with a general discussion and wrap up. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Stephen Malloy, who's going to take us through an overview of ISO 41001. Stephen? Stephen, you need to unmute yourself.
Stephen is still muted.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me now? Thank you. I was happily talking to myself there for the first minute or two.
The image was good.
Thank you, Cliff. ISO 41001 is actually the first attempt at the various countries in the world to develop a common standard around facility management, and specifically a management system with requirements and guidance for use. So with it being a world standard, it has to be a collective experience of different countries, first world countries, third world countries, countries that are outsourced in facilities management like the UK, countries that are largely insourced in terms of facilities management. And it represents a high level requirement, a very high level requirement for a management system to ensure quality in facilities management. The whole basis of the ISO 41001 is in fact the ISO 9000 series, which is quality management. And many of the pillars of 41001 are directly from the pillars of 9001. And for those of you who are familiar with quality management in 9001, you will see more detail on what are the requirements within the facilities management areas. The standard is high level because, as we all know, there's different forms of facilities management, in-source, outsource. There's different expectations across the world in terms of facilities management. And the first item in the document is understanding the organization and the core business goals. So understanding the organization and its context gives guidelines on how one can start formulating a management system standard. It then discusses various aspects on how to determine the scope of the system. And of course, the scope of the system would include all the services that would be rendered at a site. What's important is it's actually a site-specific standard or contract-specific standard. So for each facilities management site or each facilities management contract, there may be a unique management system put in place to meet the needs of the core business in that area. So it's a standard that can be used to develop a site-specific management system. The next item under 4.2 discusses the expectations of what is all shareholders, the core business, the facilities unit, the financial unit, of course, who has a big impact on what actually gets delivered at the end of the day. And then it dives into the principles of the ISO 9001, which is quality management. And it describes the leadership, what leadership and commitment needs to be put in place in terms of the entire facility system. It talks about the formulation of a policy. It talks about roles, organizational roles and responsibilities. But again, it's a very high level document to allow each country across the world, each type of facilities management entity, whether it's in-sourced or outsourced, to interpret these standards. It goes on to the next aspects of quality management, which is planning. And there it looks at risk management and opportunities, and it looks at how planning is put in place. Again, it doesn't specify what plans have to be developed in a very much detail, but just at a high level, for instance, it will discuss, let me just give a few examples here. It talks about business continuity, emergency preparedness. It talks about setting facilities management objectives in terms of policies, and of course, taking it one step further to take into account the planning phase that has to happen in terms of resource, budgets, responsibilities, roles, frequencies, planning horizons. So it sets it out at quite a high level for each site for facilities management, or each contract for facilities management if it's outsourced, to interpret these planning aspects and take it forward. The next crucial area under quality management, it talks about support. And here it talks about resources in terms of finance people, competence of people. It talks about awareness in terms of communication, awareness of policy. It talks about various documentation requirements. And with 41001, in order to get certification, there will be an independent auditor that is certified to audit ISO 41001, and they'll go through the document systems in your business to see that you have adhered to the various requirements. The next stage, we look at operations. It talks about operational planning. It talks about facilities managing information. Again, it doesn't specify the exact document requirements. The person implementing would interpret what is needed. Other key issues is performance and evaluation, and that's the whole internal audit process, management review to improve. That's a key principle of continual improvement. And non-conformities, if there is a non-conformity in the facilities management, how do you correct it? How do you prevent it? So under the annexure, under 41001, it has some more detailed guidelines that gives some examples on how to implement 41001. But again, it's a high level requirement that each facilities manager or facilities management unit, whether it's internal, needs to operate and implement. Thank you, Cliff. That's the summary of ISO 41001.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I think that creates and provides a clear overview as to what 41001 is all about. A question here, a comment from Ben Potgieter. Hello, Ben. Nice to have you on board from Durban. Yeah, there is a PowerPoint presentation, or there are notes that will be made available after the presentation. We decided in our wisdom or otherwise that PowerPoint presentations, whilst the speakers are on the go, can be a little bit distracting from time to time. So that's why we don't display the actual presentation or the content of what our speakers are going through. Right, I don't see too many comments coming through. I don't see any questions at this point in time. Marianne, do you see anything there?
No, Cliff, we're good to go.
We're good to go. So right, let's be good to go, and let's call on Craig Henry, who has for a long time been involved in the SANS 1752 standard. Craig, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Cliff, and to SAFMA for hosting this event, and also welcome to all the participants. Yes, I was fortunate, to be involved in the standards development process from the outset, and we got started around 2014. So that's what, 6 years ago, and it was triggered by the ISO initiation process, and that further triggered by SAFMA that actually got the ball rolling, getting the standards process underway in South Africa. And when we started, there's a very structured way in which things actually happens in the standards world, and that's fully understood. We recognized, that it could be several years before the facilities management, the management system standard actually comes into being. And we felt that from a South African perspective, we wanted to accelerate the process internally, and we actually initiated what SABS calls a homegrown standard, meaning that we registered our intent to create a new South African standard, and that became the sort of the birth of the Strategic Facilities Management Standard, the SANS 1752. So as much as we did parallel the participation in the ISO 41000 standard, we continued in parallel to pursue the SANS 1752 standard. At the same time, we were also busy with the ISO 41011, which was the vocabulary, and the ISO 41012, which is the guidance on strategic sourcing and development of agreements. So just because of all of those parallel activity, we just felt that letting South Africa accelerate our own management system standard, and that was then published, a year before the 41001 standard. So just to give you that bit of context. And what we also felt, the team, obviously being all South Africans, we had insight into, the other standards that had been on the scene. And we felt that in some instances, we wanted to develop more detail that could, support the South African community in accelerating our maturity in facility management, given that many of the countries in Europe or America, were leading the way. So when we started the standard, we created an illustration which is within the standard, sort of, and gives an introductory context to the standard. And that presentation we will certainly share, with the participants afterwards. But it's an illustration that has, I'm just wanted to put it in front of me, that has several perspectives that explains how the standard will unfold. So firstly, we talk about strategic, tactical, and operational management levels. These are terms that's quite intuitive to everyone. We use it every day. But it was important to say that there is a strategic perspective that defines the future, whether the future is 3, 5, 10, 20 years into the future. There's a tactical component that says, you know, how we will realize that future. And then there's an operational component, which is actually dealing with the nitty-gritty day-to-day implementation, obviously of which is measured against the tactical objectives and which ultimately then will achieve the strategic objectives. We then superimposed on that a process view and from a life cycle perspective, and effectively it had sort of 3 components, very simplistically: the organization strategic plan, which once defined is an input to the facility strategic plan, which in turn feeds into the life cycle activities of things such as acquire and optimize, service, operate, maintain, dispose, the measuring, monitoring, and that in turn, you know, creates a feedback loop back into the organization strategic plan and the strategic facilities plan. What is then further superimposed on that is then the what we call the pillars of the standard, very similar to the sections of the pillars that Stephen was articulating. And it includes leadership, planning, support, operation, evaluation, and improvement. And I'll go into, you know, into some of these specifically. Each of those, and again, what we again superimpose is under each of those pillars, we sort of gave examples of certain documents that would have to be in place to demonstrate conformance with, say, the leadership pillar. As example, the policy, the facility management policy. And these things obviously become important, you know, when you eventually look at certification into the future. Then we also had the concept of the delivery organization and the demand organization. The demand organization is effectively the organization that defines its facility management requirements. And the delivery organization is that organization, whether in-source or outsource, that delivers on the requirements. And then finally, the final sort of concept that was superimposed is sort of the quality management concept of, you know, you plan something, you check that things are working, and if you find deviations, you then, you know, act to correct or act to improve. So in this one illustration, you know, these sort of concepts are communicated, you know, prior to actually getting into the detail. So as one gets into the detail, we have a section then that talks about, you know, organizational context, and importantly, not just defining the organizational context in terms of what the organization is about, but also defining what the scope of facility management is. Now, there are perhaps several documents that broadly describes facility management, but absolutely every organization is unique. So every organization has to define what is my scope of facility management. And indeed, that is important to define because that is the focus or the subject of the standard that you're going to implement. So that context, setting that context is very important, you know, then prior to going into the 6 pillars. So leadership, you know, includes demonstrating that the senior organization, the senior members of the organization has demonstrated commitment to facility management and the implementation of the standard. And we know that if senior leadership doesn't commit, whether it be in terms of accountabilities, responsibilities, organization, then very little happens. So leadership is a pivotal part to make sure that all the subsequent matters actually does get implemented, is accounted for, etc. The next step is sort of planning, and here the SANS standard has gone into a little bit more detail. You know, it emphasizes that once the organization strategic plan is developed, immediately thereafter, the facility strategic plan should be developed, or even better, they should be done really concurrently. And the facility strategic plan, has two important elements. The one is the strategic elements, and the other is what we call functional plans. So if I can use an example, an organization might say, I need to establish a presence in a city that currently I do not have presence. That feeds into the property acquisition and development plan as a strategic component of the plan. And that will then trigger functional plans like architectural and engineering design, project construction management. So the planning components, tries to articulate the linkage from organization plan to strategic facility management plan, which has certain strategic components, and then functional plans, which is, the plans that gets sort of implemented on an operational level. Then there's also the support elements. And again, the necessity for the support components of, providing resources. Sorry, I've just seen here, I think that I'm about to be signed out, and I hope I don't get signed out. But the support component are those elements that are necessary for the operations, components of the standard to be implemented, because without the support of resources.
Oops, have we lost Craig?
Yes, I think Craig has been lost.
What would have caused him to got lost? In the meantime, are there any questions? Are there any chats coming through? I don't see any. No. Well, I'm sure we can catch up with Craig under the general sort of chat session. I don't see him coming back right now. So let's ask Johan Eisland to give us his views on any differences, if any, and also his views on the standards that facilities managers have at their disposal. Johan?
Thank you, Cliff. Let's just make sure that everybody can hear my audio properly. If anybody has a problem, they must just signal, and then we can adjust that. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for discussing this very important and relevant issue for everybody in the facility management environment. I think what is important about SANS and 41,001 is in fact not the differences, but actually the similarities. I think we need to start out with the fact that ISO has a particular construct that is used for any management standard. So these two standards are very similar from the word go. They have similar components. I think the key issue that we need to look at, whether we're talking about SANS 1752 or ISO 41001, is what it can do for an organization. And here, I think the most important element is that it provides a framework for any organization, whether it is an organization that has been in this business for a long time, or is doing excellent work, or somebody that is just starting out or not sure how well they're doing, to assess the organization against the structure provided by that particular standard. And we know that that standard represents international best practice, not just any kind of measure that you want to use, but actually international best practice. So I think that is the element to really focus on. While there may be small differences in wording between the two standards, it is not of such a nature that the standards are to be viewed as being different standards. They have the same intention. And I think the benefits that organizations can derive from implementing those standards are the things that we need to focus on. So Stephen spoke a little bit about conformity. Let me just add to that and say that when we talk about the conformity against the standard, so certification of an organization against the standard, if you have been certified against 1752, or whether you've been certified against 41001, you're going to find that the process is the same, and you're going to need the same kind of evidence in order to get certified. So in terms of the practical process of conformity, it will be a similar process. I think the key differences for me between these two standards lie not in the documentation, but lie in the use of the documents and exactly this process of certification. So let me delve into that a little bit. SANS 1752 is applicable in South Africa only. It has no standing outside of the borders of this country. And therefore, it is a document and a system standard that can be used by any organization that operates within the borders of South Africa. And that would be the vast majority of demand organizations and probably even suppliers. So we're looking at a standard that addresses the requirements of the FM industry to the largest possible extent. So state institutions, Joe Blog, and any other demand organization that requires facility management services, big or small. ISO 41001, on the other hand, does not apply within the borders of South Africa. As was pointed out by Stephen earlier, it is an ISO standard, it's an international standard, and unless a country has adopted that standard for use in its own country, it is not applicable. In the case of South Africa, we have not adopted that standard for use in South Africa. So you almost have an in and out situation where companies that operate cross-border will probably have to look at conformity or certification against 41001, because that is the document that will be accepted everywhere in the world and will be applied everywhere in the world. Here we're talking about a fairly limited number of organizations, both suppliers and demand organizations that have a foothold both in South Africa and outside of South Africa. Why is that important? That is important simply from a cost perspective. We have no control over the certification or the, let's rather call it the conformity process cost of conforming to or getting certified against 41001. That is a cost which will probably be denominated in dollars or euros or pounds. And as we all know, as soon as you translate those things into a South African currency, it becomes problematic. Whereas with SANS 1752, certification will be under the control of SANS, the South African certification organization, and therefore it will be rand denominated costs. And there we have at least some assurance that we're not looking at the same kind of cost structures as you would look at for 41001. And I think therein is a very important distinction between these two standards. The application of the standard or the use of the standard for any organization of any one of those two standards would bring the same benefit and the same value. But to certify against that standard is going to be very dear to most South African organizations, and I think that is a key aspect to look at. Cliff, I think at the moment, for the moment, I want to withstand with that little bit of input. Maybe we can take some questions and broaden out on the discussion.
Super, Johan. Thank you very much for that comparison. Almost, it's not, as you say, differences but similarities, and highlighting those. And the whole topic about certification and so forth, I'm sure is worthy of discussion at some stage, because up until now, if I'm correct, there hasn't been a huge emphasis on the certification side of it. There's been a sort of a self-certification or self-compliance monitoring system in place, and of course, certification will add a lot of value to both standards. What's your view on that, Johan?
Certification is always something that starts out slowly and then picks up a curve, and so somebody in the industry has to start, and it's always a slow start. So we more or less in that phase. There are two organizations, and I speak under correction, but there are two organizations in South Africa that have done the self-declaration, which is under the auspices of, and now I need to be careful about the terminology, because as most members know, we've had legal battles about the exact terminology. But so the process that SAFMA has put into place for self-certification is in fact a first step towards formal certification. And there are organizations that have done that, a big provider organization in the country and one of the big banks. So let's leave it at that for the moment. In the rest of the world, certification is equally moving very slowly, and we are looking at no more than about 5 individual organizations in any one country at the moment that have gone through that process. So it is something that will pick up speed, and I think the important thing is that people understand what the benefit is of registering against that particular standard.
Thanks for that, Johan, and you're quite right. All these things do take time, and it's a case of tangible sort of evidence of benefits before it really takes off. Craig is back. He's rejoined us. So Craig, if you can unmute yourself, and if you can video yourself, and you're welcome, please, to add to your previous points.
Thank you, Cliff. Apologies, my computer just decided to take control, start its update, shut down, etc., etc. So I had to jump onto another computer, and this one, the camera doesn't work. So if you just bear with me, that you'll just be sort of hearing me. So I was busy with the, with the support element and really emphasizing, similar to the ISO 41001, is that, the support in terms of resource requirements, people, financial, information, computerized tools, related enablers are, are essential to enable, really the strategic and operational aspects from being realized. And the SANS the SANS 1752, speaks to very similar support aspects as per the ISO standard. Then on the operations side, the SANS 1752 goes into a little bit more detail, and it speaks to, the planning and control, defining your processes, the control requirements, the criteria. It deals with the mobilization of services. So, this is something which we are, particularly if you're in an outsource environment, and perhaps the current term of contract comes to an end. If the existing provider is unfortunate not to have a renewal of contract, perhaps a new party comes in, we know that the mobilization of new services, whether it previously didn't exist or because of a new provider, is a very onerous and intense process. And if that mobilization doesn't happen, correctly, it creates lots of operational problems. So in the SANS standard, it talks to the mobilization in terms of the planning, the inputs requirement, assuring that the mobilization is tracking to plan, meeting all the criteria and objectives, the review of that mobilization. And when a mobilization has been done well, you start off with a very stable operation. So mobilization is very critical. It then also goes into the delivery and operations of facility, services. It talks about, the requirements that has to be specified by the demand organization, and then how the delivery organization will meet those requirements. Some of those requirements, might be, outsourced, and hence there's also a section that deals with sourcing and outsourcing, risk management, and then service delivery review. So there are two areas in my mind that SANS 1752 sort of brings quite a bit more detail than the ISO standard. It's in the planning area and in the operations area, and we felt that necessary again to support and aid the organizations in South Africa that might still be tracking at an earlier maturity than our other European or American counterparts. The next section was the performance evaluation, very similar to the ISO, monitoring, measuring, analyzing, evaluating, internal audit and management review. And then the final section, the performance improvement, also very similar to ISO, the non-conformity and corrective action and continual improvement. So Cliff, in summary, that is then the sort of an overview of the SANS 1752. And as we said, lots of similarity, because obviously they are based on the same, if I can call, management system platform. But in the SANS 17, you'll find a bit more detail around planning and operations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you for your inputs there. And in our opening remarks, we made mention of the fact that COVID-19 has been exhausted on our SAFMA webinars, and we found we couldn't move away from it. And there was a very interesting question put to all, a very interesting comment put to all by Roberta about the impact of COVID-19 on the development of standards for temporary facilities. Thank you, Stephen, for answering that on the chat line or the chat facility. And yeah, there are obviously no items being discussed or being put in place yet, but it's obviously under discussion. And interesting to see, and thanks for this, Stephen, interesting to see that China requested a new standard to deal with issues under abnormal circumstances. Peter Kirchhoff also asked us about how things can be modified and updated to accommodate the current situation. And I think that's contained in Stephen's answer there as well. I don't see any further comments or questions coming through. Any of the panel got any additions?
Yeah, Cliff, I think maybe it's important just to add to Stephen's input that standard that is proposed is initially called Guidance on Emergency Management of Epidemic in the Workplace. So it will be a but that is the initial name of the standard. And I think it's important that people should understand that this standard will come about in the normal way that standards come about, and it's going to be a 2-year kind of process. These things don't happen quickly. But also very important is that it doesn't detract anything from the implementation of SANS 1752, the value of SANS 1752, and for that matter of 41001. It makes no difference because you still require a management system for facility management, and you know, the measures that are implemented with regards to an emergency or a pandemic is merely an add-on.
I think that's a very, very worthwhile point, and thanks for emphasizing that, Johan. It puts it very clearly. And of course, as you quite rightly say, any new development will have to follow the standard process, and it will have to go through the reviews and peer reviews and industry reviews and the like. So yeah, there's no quick fix here, and there's no sort of speeding up the process. The one that was touched on by Craig, where he emphasized the fact that with the acceptance of a standard and implementation of a standard by any organization, and in fact by anybody wanting to assist an organization getting a standard in place, is that each organization is totally unique. There's no one size fits all, and one often sees a tendency in a lot of issues to have a copy and paste mentality. My view is, and I'm sure others will support me on this, that this is not a place for a copy and paste. That one has got to start from scratch with any organization, and that's the long and the short of it. Do you agree with me, Stephen, Johan, Craig?
Yes, the standards is very specific to the organization, the core, what do they call the core requirements of organization, the core requirements of the facilities entity, the budget of the facilities entity. And the importance of having a standard, though, is similar to when you buy a car. When you buy a car, you want certain safety standards. The airbags have to be approved, SABS approved or ISO approved. And then it gives one a comfort when you're buying a car, that you're buying something of quality that will be safe for your family, that will deliver the service required. So with facilities management, it's the same principle. Most of the biggest facilities management organizations in the world are registered with ISO 9001. This is over the last 10, 15 years as a form of quality. And going forward, this will be driven down specifically to a specific clients, to specific sites in the form of ISO 41001, which further details quality management to ensure that whoever has facilities management or buys facilities management through outsourced entity, that they have value, they're purchasing something of value. So whatever their budgets, whatever their requirements, they're gonna get the best value for what they put into it. And that's for me, is the benefit of having a standard in place that will ensure value for money, value for what you want, etc. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Stephen. A question here from Andrew, our chairman. He says, given that this is a long road, what aspect of the standards would the panel suggest an FM organization focus on first? Anybody like to have a go at that, Johan?
Yeah, it seems that Andrew is asking about the new proposed standard concerning COVID. If that is the case, then there is no aspect of it that you can really make use of at the moment, because there's no real document. There's only a proposal, and it's a whole process. When we talk about, and I'd like to get back to 1752 and 41,001, there really now is a decision to be made by organizations about implementation of the standard, or one of those standards, depending on their particular situation. So for the average South African demand organization, whether it's a bank or a school or whatever it may be, university, it doesn't matter, the organization makes the decision that it wishes to certify against that particular standard and the benefit that will have for the organization. The point that Stephen already made is that this standard provides a quality assurance to not only the demand organization that is delivering services, but it also provides a quality management or a quality assurance statement to anybody buying services from someone who is already accredited against the standard. Stephen used the example of 9001. So I think most people that are familiar with 9001 will know exactly what that means. You have a certain assurance of quality when you deal with companies that are 9001 certified.
Thanks for that.
Cliff, maybe just a comment on my side, which
Thanks, Craig.
just post a comment. For me, two things are important. From an organizational context, it's really defining the scope of facility management for your organization. And in my mind, that is one of
your audio failed there.
Eye-opening experience if it's done properly. And when they do, sorry, can you hear me now?
That's better. That's better.
I just see the signal strain. Okay, great. Yeah, so I don't know where I was caught up, but I was saying that for me, firstly, defining the scope of FM for your organization, that actually just highlights the critical role that FM actually plays in your organization, and defining the specific nature of it, whether you're talking about from cleaning services to property development, whatever the case may be, defining that scope. And then the second important focus is the leadership. If you can gain the leadership commitment to say, listen, this is important to us, and I'm setting, whether it's 1, 2, 3 important objectives or milestones, that becomes the catalyst, to starting to embed the subsequent elements, and actually drives the urgency, behind it. So, in answering, if you can clear out what is FM for your organization and getting leadership commitment, that sets the scene, for the future. Thanks.
I see, Cliff, can I come back into it?
Please,
I see Andrew's comment, and Andrew is in fact correct. You can all look at his comment on the chat. And also Craig reaffirmed that now. So leadership is key. And if you get the go ahead from the top dog, then it's all go. But I think facility managers don't always have that situation where they necessarily can walk into the boardroom and get approval for implementation of 1752 in their organization. So I think we shouldn't be discouraged by that. If there is not a leadership decision now, we can use the stuff that we control as facility managers now. In other words, the operational aspects of it. So we can shape from the bottom up rather than only from the top down. So start shaping what you can shape in conformance to these standards, and then go to your board or to your top management and say, listen guys, this is what the picture looks like. It's going to help the understanding anyway. So I don't think we should only, yes, it will be very nice to get that approval from the top and you have a go ahead and you do it. But I think we shouldn't be discouraged if that is not immediately available and accessible.
And of course, by focusing and putting emphasis on the operational side, our facility management teams are internally showing leadership in promoting this aspect within their organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and adding value to the worth of facility management in any organization.
Yeah.
It's almost a pity that we've got to talk like this, but that's the fact in most organizations, is it not?
Yeah, yeah.
Are there any more comments from participants? Any more questions? If not, we are going to, I think, conclude the session. I don't see any more coming through. Any final remarks from you, Stephen?
Yes, thanks, Cliff. I think that many facilities organizations and facilities management units already have a good 60–70% of the systems in place. Many of them are on the operational side. How do you manage cleaning? How do you manage security? Those are systems that are already in place. And the completion of the entire scope, from leadership to strategy to policy, all those items can be added on, not with a huge effort, but just by keeping at the process of quality management and facilities management doing what they do every day. So I think they must just keep at it. Thank you.
Thanks for that. That's Stephen, and yes, a lot of what can be done is already there. So let's just formalize that and let's capitalize on what we know and what we are good at. There've been a couple of comments around the availability of presentations and the like, and we will make available what we have from the panel. I think that could be a good way to go. I'd also like to ask any of our participants here if there are any particular topics that you would like to see covered under our SAFMA webinars. Please drop us a note, info@safma.co.za or marianne@safma.co.za. We'd be very interested to pick up on any topics that you might have for future discussions. We have a few lined up. We want to talk about risk management in facility management at some stage. We want to talk about and put on a webinar that deals with the putting together of a proper request for proposal by organizations that are thinking of going out for an outsourced facility management solution, and to also touch on how organizations should possibly respond to such RFPs. So that could be quite an interesting topic. We've also been looking and talking about future trends in facility management. And we know that the only thing certain about the future is that it's full of change. Yes, and we will be touching on COVID-19 again little bit down the line to test this real impact of this this issue on the facility management industry. So yeah, we've got a few lined up, and thank you to all to our panel. Thank you, Johan.
Can I maybe just come in with a word at the end? I think if we talk about ISO standards, it's very important to remember that these standards are created with one purpose really, and that is to establish international best practice about a particular issue. And it is open and available to any organization to go and purchase that standard. You simply contact the SABS. Well, when I say simply, not always just that simple, but you basically contact the SABS and you get a quote for the standard that you wish to have, and you work through that standard. Yes, it may be some work to get through it, but work through that standard, and you look at what you can implement in your organization. And maybe it's a good idea to just list the standards. So there's not only the management standards that we spoke about today, so 41001 and SANS 1752. There is a standard on terminology, and I think we all agree if we have the terminology under the belt, then we'll all understand each other a lot better in this field. So that's it's called terminology, and that's 41011. Then there is one on sourcing, which is 41012, and that deals with two issues. It deals with how to source, so the due diligence process, and it deals with how to put an SLA together. Very helpful, full of guidance, good standards. Then there is 41013, which talks about scope, benefits, and additional concepts in FM, which is very handy for people that you know, maybe new in the industry specifically. And then there will very shortly be 41014, which is about strategy, very helpful document as well that any organization can use. As I said, that it will be out shortly, so I would expect that it will be published probably late this year, early next year. The next standard that is then in line is FM plans. In other words, how to put plans together for your organization across all of the operational contexts that you deal with, and so the list goes on. So I would actually also like to add to your request, Cliff, that people don't only tell SAFMA what it is that they're interested in terms of discussing, but that they drop you guys a line in terms of what they would see as ISO standards, as documentation that could be helpful to them in implementing better facility management within their organizations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, thanks, Johan, for that. I'd like to thank our panel, Craig, Johan, and Stephen. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks very much for your input. And then to all participants, thank you very much for joining us, for participating in this SAFMA webinar, and we'll see you in a few weeks' time. Cheers for now. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.